This is another in our series in this season of Vocations, which began on Vocations Sunday. And I have with me Rebecca, who is going to introduce herself before I throw those questions at her.
Hello, I'm Rebecca and I'm a first year student training to become ordained next summer. I'm studying part-time because I work in higher education.
Okay, thank you very much. So my first question, which is a very important one, how did you know God was calling you?
I felt a bit uncomfortable, if I'm honest. It was enough to get my attention. Some of the same Bible verses kept coming round and round. And I took time to wonder why I felt uncomfortable, what it was that God might be saying. And the more I spent time thinking about it, the more things I could see that pointed towards him calling, and he persisted gently.
Right, a gentle persuasion.
Persistence, yes.
Okay, so feeling uncomfortable, what practical things did you do when you realised that God was calling you?
First of all, I asked someone to pray for me. I've got a friend who often prays when I have things happening in my life. And because I had a fairly strong sense it was to a leadership role, I used some of the resources on the Vocations section of the CPAS website. And I went along to an Exploring Vocations event in the diocese, after which I met with the DDO at the time, and they gave me some structured pieces of reflection to try and help me work through the things I was thinking about.
Right, okay. Very practical then. And how did you feel when you knew that you had been called to be something other than a faithful disciple, really?
It became clear pretty early on that it was a call to ordained leadership in some way, and my visceral response was it's too hard and it's impractical. To start with, I found other things to do in church, other ways to use my skills. I suppose looking back, it was probably about trying to dodge what I was feeling. So there was this surprise, then exploration, very practical, and then some denial and an ongoing gentle feeling that it wasn't going away, some further exploration, and eventually peace. I mean, there's been since hard work, but lots and lots of God's peace, and I think I'm still to some extent working out what it's going to mean for me to be called.
Okay, can I just ask you, when you say it wasn't practical, what's that about?
So I have been working in higher education for quite a long time. I am reasonably capable in my work. I am the main source of income for our household. I am quite a practical person. I like to work things through in my own mind. The consequences, I thought, for my daughter and my husband were going to be tricky, the consequences of that call. And although deep down I know that God doesn't call me to things that would be bad for me or for them, I just couldn't work it out in my own head to start with.
Okay. And how did you continue this process? What was your response as you continued?
Yeah, I'm still working things out in some ways. I started to notice things I felt passionate about, and I recognised that they're God-given as well as the skills that I have that might be useful. And I'm starting to notice things other people I'm studying with feel passionate about, and the fact that I don't, and that the church needs people to lead and serve with all sorts of skills and in all sorts of different contexts. And I think part of the process for me of responding to calling was recognizing that God has made me a certain shape, and that's a good thing, and that he wasn't calling me to become whatever stereotype I might have in my head of those in leadership in the church, but to become the best version of myself. There was a particular reflection. I quite often use the Northumbria Community's morning prayer, and there's a particular reflection in there that really resonated with me when I was working things through. It says, what God may hereafter require of you, you mustn't give yourself the least trouble about. Everything he gives you to do, you must do as well as ever you can. That's the best possible preparation for what he may want you to do next. If people, and I heard my own name, if you would but do the thing in front of you to do, you would always find yourself ready for what came next.
And I think that's by George MacDonald, is that right?
It is, yes.
Okay. Ready for what God has for you to do next. Okay. So how has pursuing your call become important?
I think when I realised that it was about becoming, not doing. So it wasn't about the things that God was asking me to do. It was about the things he had already put in me, the experiences I'd had, the things I was passionate about, the skills I had. When I realised it was about becoming something based on who I already was, and as I started to feel passionate about caring for and leading and serving in the church in different contexts, and I'm still working through what that will be, although I have a growing sense. I think that's when it became increasingly important to me to really go for it, to really to study and to talk with others who felt the same calling, and to start to allow myself to get a little bit excited even when I'm nervous or concerned, but to start to allow myself to get excited about what God was doing in my life.
Okay. So, my final question has two parts to it. What would you say to someone who thinks that God might be calling them?
Two things. One is don't be too surprised, and the other is take time to listen carefully. I guess what I mean by don't be too surprised is that God calls everyone, actually. I have a friend for whom leading their company is definitely their calling, the best way they can give of themselves to build up others who work for them and demonstrate Christ to others. And another lady who said to me, sometimes I wake in the night feeling an urgency to pray for someone. And at this time of her life, this is her calling. And she has had other significant things she's done in her life as a working for a Christian charity in the past. And the best church warden I ever knew was just passionate about loving and serving the church in a practical way. I don't know how many of those would have thought that their calling was significant, but there isn't a hierarchy on calling, and it doesn't just happen to a special few people. So the first thing really is not to be surprised, but then you have to do something, and the best thing to do first is to listen. And so you can't ignore it. You can listen to your life, the things you're good at, your experiences, the things you care about, the things that frustrate you, and then ask God to show you how those things relate to what he might be calling you to. Following a daily Bible reading pattern is really helpful, because for me the same Bible verses kept coming round and round, even though that sounds impossible in a Bible reading plan, but the same themes kept coming round and round. And listening as well to those who know you. You know, there were people who, when I thought about how they would describe me, actually some of the words really lent themselves to what I thought God was calling me to. And for a couple of people in whom I confided, they gave me such reassurance that I wasn't mad, or they were unsurprised.
Okay, so that's the first part of the question. However, knowing that God has called you is one thing, but what if you feel that you are ill-prepared or ill-equipped, or you're doubting yourself? What would you say?
I've experienced it, but I've come to believe that if you were 100% confident that you were a perfect fit for a particular calling or a particular role, then you probably wouldn't be the right person, actually. Not because you shouldn't recognise the skills you have, but because God, throughout the Bible, calls those to him who will rely on him, and those who say, I'll trust what you're saying. And God has shown it. I mean, has been faithful my whole life, actually, in helping me grow into what it is he wants me to become. And a calling to ordained ministry for me isn't even the end of the journey, I don't suppose.
That's great. Thank you so much. That's fun. I've learned a lot from that, and I found it very encouraging. Thank you very much, Becky.
A pleasure. Thank you very much.